Emotional scenes and an historic first. MPs vote in favour of the assisted dying bill, to the relief of some and the heartbreak of others.
The ayes to the right, 330. The noes to the left, 275. The ayes have it, and look!
Following impassioned arguments from both sides of the debate, from all sides of the political sphere, this afternoon the decision was made. Adults with less than 6 months to live can now choose to end their own lives.
I'm actually really proud of what's happened today, and I'm also clearly very pleased with the result. It means that we can start to fix the problems that we have around end of life.
This, I think, very, very, very dangerous step can be stopped, and we must do everything we can to do that.
Tonight we've got all the reaction to the vote and we'll talk through exactly what happens next. We'll also hear from Dame Esther Rantzen, one of the most high-profile campaigners in favour of a change in the law.
My goodness me, was that thrilling. I've got to stay alive a bit longer, haven't I?
Also on the programme, Labour's Louise Haigh resigns as Transport Secretary after it emerged she was convicted of fraud 10 years ago. And they've called it the project of the century. A first look inside the rebuilt Notre Dame Cathedral, gutted by fire.
This is the ITV Evening News with Charlene White.
Good evening. There was a sobering mix of principles, passion and pride in the House of Commons today as MPs voted through the controversial bill on assisted dying. The gravity and significance of the day wasn't lost on anyone. When the result was read out in the House of Commons, it was met by silence. It was a free vote that split political parties and saw MPs vote with their conscience. The Prime Minister was among those who voted in favour. His Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, voted against. But outside Parliament, the result was met with joy from pro-campaigners. Dame Esther Rantzen, who'd secured a promise from Sir Keir Starmer to bring the bill forward, told ITV News she was absolutely thrilled. In a moment, what happens next, what it means and what it says about our society. But first, here's our Deputy Political Editor, Anushka Asthana, on the landmark moment.
It was unusual today that in the House of Commons chamber, there was nothing to bring to order.
Order! Order.
MPs waited in silent anticipation.
The ayes to the right, 330. The noes to the left, 275.
With just a slight gasp at the news of a historic result.
The ayes have it, and look!
Today, Parliament voted in favour of a bill to legalise assisted dying. The quiet, a mark of respect after an emotional 5 hours.
As a society, we risk pushing people to seek an early death. I cannot in good conscience support this.
I want this choice for my constituents. I want it for those whom I love.
MPs were free to vote with their conscience for this private member's bill, brought by Labour MP Kim Leadbeater.
I know that this is not easy. It certainly hasn't been easy for me. But if any of us wanted an easy life, I'm afraid we're in the wrong place.
It united politicians across party lines who disagree about so much else.
Let today not be a vote for despair, but the start of a proper debate about dying well, in which we have a better idea than a state suicide service.
There will be those who say to themselves they don't want to be a burden. And I can imagine myself saying that in particular circumstances.
There were heartbreaking stories. One MP backing the bill after her experience fighting back from major surgery.
But that moment also gave me a glimpse of how I would want to live my death, just as I've lived my life, empowered by choices available to me, living that death with the dignity and respect.
I hope she forgives me for raising her personal situation.
Another opposing it after her daughter's survival from serious illness.
And those first 5 days she did not sleep and she did not eat and she was crying out in pain. But I saw what good medicine can do.
Some voices sounded so certain, and yet for many, including dozens of new Labour MPs, this was no easy choice. Uma Kumaran agonised about the decision.
I've not slept over it. I've, been awake into the early hours, reading the emails and really going back and forth. And it is a huge tug of war of emotion, of your heart, of the facts, the ethics.
How many emails have you received?
Hundreds. There is not one subject that I have received more personalised emails from my constituents on than this.
She ultimately decided to vote against the bill. When did you make your mind up?
In the chamber just now.
Her colleague Calvin Bailey tipped the opposite way.
Had you spoken to me last week, the answer was no, very definitely. But in learning about the process, the important thing is going to come once we vote through the bill today.
Because this vote is not the end of the process. The bill still has many hurdles to jump, with MPs like Bailey saying they could change their votes. Something that reassured opponents disappointed by the vote.
The majority was much smaller than the number of people who said they'd vote for second reading, but only to give it further scrutiny, so we'll take them at their word. So my view is that this, I think, very, very, very dangerous step can be stopped, and we must do everything we can to do that.
I've spent 90% of my time over recent months talking about death, and that's not easy. But what it has made me realise, because I've had so many conversations with so many people, is that we do need to talk about death more.
But Leadbeater and the campaigners who have backed her believe this will become law. Anushka Astana, ITV News.
Well, as you saw there, the divisions inside Parliament were reflected outside, with campaigners for both sides staging protests in Westminster. And although it was voted through, as Anushka said, it's not the end of the debate. There are still some important steps the bill has to pass if it's to become law. One of its key supporters, Dame Esther Rantzen, told us she's sure it will now be taken through very carefully. Here's our UK editor, Paul Brand, on the reaction.
OK, Josie? I know.
I can't even explain how much I would have done to just stop the pain and the stress for him.
Fantastic.
For him to say sorry all the time to us while we were looking after him was really heartbreaking and so horrible to watch.
We filmed with Nick Brown in March, just before his life became exactly what he hadn't wanted. As his cancer advanced, he felt his dignity retreated. He had the death he desperately wished to avoid.
This is a point when really I would really like to finish right now, and that's going to be much better. I don't want to live that way myself.
Today, Nick's family witnessed a moment he had hoped for. The first step towards the kind of death he would have chosen.
I think of Nick and how proud he'd be to be here and what he really wanted, and now that's going to be a thing for other people down the line to have that opportunity to choose what they want to do. It's like literally brilliant. I'm so emotional. Yeah, it's brilliant.
They are not the only ones.
Hello, is that Esther?
It was this phone call we filmed between Keir Starmer and campaigner Dame Esther Rantzen that encouraged a bill to be brought forward.
I'm personally in favour of changing the law, and I will make time available if I am Prime Minister.
Today, he voted for the bill. And this afternoon, Dame Esther's daughter gave her terminally ill mother the news they'd both wanted.
Hello?
Hello?
Hi.
Hello?
Hi. Did you see the results?
I certainly did. My goodness me, was that thrilling. I think I owe special thanks to the Prime Minister, to Sir Keir Starmer, because he enabled the debate to happen. As he'd said to me, he hoped it would be in my lifetime, and to my astonishment, and to your astonishment, it was, and we could both witness it.
How are you feeling now about the fact that you've got to see this through another stage in Parliament?
I've got to stay alive a bit longer, haven't I?
Yes.
Quite a responsibility.
But the responsibility is felt on both sides of this debate. The delight matched by the despair of those opposed to the bill. Many feel their rights are at risk and they must stop it.
I don't think a lot of MPs had even read the bill, and they need to rectify that. That's unforgivable when the risk of a mistake is that we lose a life that shouldn't have been lost.
It is not often that life is genuinely on the line in Parliament and death too. Paul Brand, ITV News, Westminster.
OK, so how would the new law work and what are the next steps? Well, Chloe Keady's here with the details.
Well, Charlene, the new law would apply to adults in England and Wales, so to those over 18 who are terminally ill and expected to die within 6 months. They must have the mental capacity to make a choice about the end of their life, and their decision must be voluntary. A clear, settled and informed wish, free from any coercion or pressure. They'll need approval from 2 independent doctors who will each carry out an assessment at least 7 days apart before deciding whether or not the person is eligible. At least one of those doctors must then make representations to a High Court judge who can also question the person who wishes to end their life. If the judge rules that they can do so, they then have to wait another 14 days to reflect on their decision. That could be reduced to 48 hours for someone whose death is thought to be imminent. When it comes to administering the medication, well, that has to be done by the person who's dying. No doctor or anyone else can do it for them. It would be illegal for someone to pressure or coerce someone into declaring that they want to end their life or induce someone to take the medication. And anyone found guilty of either of those offences could face up to 14 years in jail. The bill, of course, isn't law yet. Next, it will go to committee stage, where MPs can table amendments before facing further scrutiny and votes, both in the Commons and the Lords. If it does become law, Charlene, it won't happen before next year.
OK, Chloe, thanks very much. Well, let's hear from our Deputy Political Editor, Anushka Asthana, who's over at Westminster. Anushka, a momentous day for Parliament and for MPs, both old and new.
Yeah, hugely momentous. If we think about the previous 2 times that similar legislation was brought to Parliament, it was heavily defeated. Once before in 1997, when we had a new big Labour government just like now, and then again in 2015. Now, the difference from 2015 to now is a very different looking Parliament, and a majority of Labour MPs today voted in favour of this bill, while a majority of Conservative MPs voted against it. But on both sides, massive divides. I think you heard that in our coverage. But also, you know, the Cabinet themselves, they've been told not to speak out today because government is neutral. But privately, they have very, very different opinions. And we've heard during the debates from the likes of Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, who has big concerns. Now, opponents of this bill, because of the size of the majority, still think there is a chance that they can block it at third reading. But perhaps more likely is that there will be safeguards added via amendments, and even the proponents of the bill are open to that.
OK, Anushka, thanks very much for that. Well, as you can see, our UK editor Paul Brand has joined us in the studio. And Paul, what does today's vote tell us about how our society is changing?
Well, it suggests that society and Parliament have actually moved closer into sync, because public opinion has long been in favour of assisted dying, and today, on the face of it, it looks as if Parliament at this stage is too, after repeatedly voting it down in recent decades. And the coming months are going to see the most extraordinary debate in society. What is our attitude towards death? What is our approach to death? What role should the state play in death? What role should we as individuals play in our deaths? How much should we listen to the loud, painstaking pleas often of those who wanted assisted death versus the more quiet concerns sometimes of vulnerable people who might be coerced into it? And this isn't just a debate happening in England and Wales. There is a bill in Scotland at the moment. There's one on the Isle of Man. There's one in Jersey. This is taking place across our islands. This debate would be the biggest social change, if it happens, in half a century, since the legalisation of abortion, since the scrapping of the death penalty. It will divide people, but as we saw in Parliament today, it may also bring out the best of people in finally addressing the ultimate taboo of death.
OK, Paul, thanks very much. And you can find out how your MP voted on the assisted dying bill by visiting our website, itv.com/news. There's plenty more to come on the ITV Evening News, including jail time for the man who went on a murderous rampage with a shotgun in the Scottish Highlands. Plus, we get an incredible first look inside Notre Dame, 5 years since its devastating fire. So that and more after this short break. Welcome back. A man who stabbed his wife before going on a murderous rampage with a shotgun has been jailed for a minimum of 28 years. Finlay MacDonald, a father of 4, first attacked his wife at their home on the Isle of Skye. He then took his shotgun and a machete to hunt down and kill his brother-in-law before then going on to shoot a married couple. During MacDonald's trial, it emerged that police had spotted his car before his final attack, but were ordered not to follow. Here's our Scotland reporter, Louise Scott.
The Isle of Skye is famed for its stunning and rugged landscape. But on the 10th of August 2022, this rural community was torn apart by a shooting rampage. 41-year-old Finlay MacDonald was today found guilty of murder and 3 counts of attempted murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum of 28 years.
You carried out a series of brutal and mindlessly violent attacks with a knife and pump-action shotgun, shooting at them at close range within their own homes, where they had no opportunity to defend themselves or escape.
Father of 6, 47-year-old John McKinnon died after being shot in his kitchen. His sisters Anne and Christine said he was the best brother.
For John to have his life taken from him in this manner is beyond comprehension, and nothing can mitigate what happened that day. How can one individual cause such utter devastation, heartache and misery to so many people?
MacDonald began his attacks at the family home, where he repeatedly stabbed his wife Rowena after he found messages on her phone he falsely believed showed she was having an affair. Their 4 young children witnessed the frenzied knife attack. Finlay then drove 20 minutes to his sister's house, where he shot and killed his brother-in-law. He then drove a further 40 minutes to the house of his osteopath, seen here on dashcam, now being pursued by officers.
Police spotted Finlay MacDonald's vehicle just before he crossed the Skye Bridge, but they were told not to intercept and instead await specialist firearms officers, which allowed MacDonald to continue to the Mackenzie house.
John and Faye Mackenzie were shot multiple times before they managed to grab the gun. Questions are being asked as to how Finlay was able to travel more than 30 miles across Skye and carry out multiple attacks before being stopped.
Years gone by, police officers would have a firearm within the safe of the police office. We don't have that anymore. And when you're waiting 2 to 3 hours on a firearms team getting to you, then that's critical.
Police Scotland say proportionate plans are in place across all communities. For the families, they say today ends the long and anguishing wait for justice. Louise Scott, ITV News, Edinburgh.
Downing Street's declined to say what the Prime Minister knew about his Transport Secretary's criminal conviction, which prompted her to resign from her post last night. Louise Haigh stepped down after it emerged she pleaded guilty to a criminal offence over a missing work phone back in 2013. Well, our political reporter Jasmine Cameron-Chaleshi is over at Westminster for us, and this is another setback for Sir Keir Starmer, and the row hasn't stopped. It's still rumbling on, isn't it?
That's right, and this is the PM's first big cabinet resignation. And as you say, it relates to Louise Haigh's conduct before she became a minister. So it emerged last night that back in 2013, she told police that her work phone had been stolen when she was mugged. Later emerged that that wasn't, in fact, the case, and she ended up pleading guilty to giving a false report to the police. Now, this resulted in her getting a discharge. Now, in her resignation letter in the early hours of this morning, she said that she didn't want to become a distraction. But of course, there are big questions for the PM about what he knew and when. Now, those close to Louise Haigh argue that all this information Sir Keir knew about when he appointed her in his shadow cabinet back in 2020. But Downing Street today, they're arguing that she resigned after new information came to light. And there's also some suggestion from those in Number 10 that perhaps Louise Haigh didn't properly declare all of this information when she came into government. Now, Number 10's appointed Heidi Alexander as the new Transport Secretary. They may be hoping that the quick resignation and quick reappointment will be enough to draw a line under this matter. But I think certainly over the weekend, ministers are going to be facing a lot of questions about what exactly the PM believes Louise Haigh did wrong, and questions about the PM's political judgment more broadly.
OK, Jasmine, thanks very much for that. Violent protests have broken out in Georgia after the ruling party decided to delay its bid to join the EU. Police used water cannons to disperse thousands of people in the capital, Tbilisi, who were protesting at the government's decision not to hold talks about joining the EU until 2028. The Georgian Prime Minister accused the EU of a cascade of insults and blackmail. Voters in Ireland are heading to the polls to decide who they want to lead their next parliament. Current polls show the main parties, Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil and Sinn Féin, are all set to claim around 20% of the vote. Polls close at 10 p.m. tonight, but it could take several days before the final results are announced. The French President Emmanuel Macron inspected the spectacular renovation of the Notre Dame Cathedral today. He thanked the hundreds of craftsmen and women who helped restore the medieval church back to its former glory. A devastating fire saw the roof and its famous wooden spire collapse in scenes that shocked France and many around the world. It's due to open again to the public, though, this week. Here's Will Tullis.
For more than 900 years, Notre Dame has been the spiritual centre of Paris. Today, 5 years after it was almost completely destroyed by fire, the cathedral lives again in its newest form. Repaired and reinvented, its restoration complete.
It feels like it was built yesterday, like it's just been born. Because it's been so carefully restored and cleaned, it looks really extraordinary.
This long and costly road to revival was sparked by a fire that broke out during repair work. A near millennium of French history went up in flames, and Notre Dame's iconic spire was feared lost forever. Today, 5.5 years and almost £600 million later, its new spire graces the Paris skyline once more. This morning, cameras were allowed inside Notre Dame alongside President Macron and the Archbishop of Paris, giving us a first glimpse of the cathedral with its new lease of life. The nave has been restored to its former Gothic glory. These photos revealing the scale of the task teams of specialist restorers faced, a miracle of masonry. Stained glass windows avoided the worst effects of the fire, but they too have now been cleaned, giving the cathedral a fresh face.
Jean-Louis Bidet, charpentier.
Merci. And new oak beams from forests across France now hold the building's spire proudly aloft. The French president spoke to some of the builders involved in the repair work, where he made clear this was as much about restoring national pride as it was restoring a cathedral.
The shock of the reopening will be as strong as the shock of the fire. It will be a shock of hope.
Notre Dame will be open to the public from the 7th of December, a building that has survived revolutions, world wars and a near-fatal fire, rebuilt to stand the test of time. Will Tullis, ITV News.
And there's more on that story on ITVX and on our website, itv.com/news, where you can find more on the rest of the day's big stories. You'll also find our podcast, What You Need to Know, which is about how to avoid getting scammed during Black Friday sales. Well, you're watching the ITV Evening News. It's just coming up to 7 o'clock. Emmerdale's here in half an hour. But first, a community comes together in Corby to remember Harshita Brella, who was found dead in the boot of a car. MasterChef presenter Greg Wallace faces fresh allegations of inappropriate comments. Gang members are jailed over a drug bust worth a staggering £90 million, while the price of getting a tattoo is expected to go up in Wales. How the Beatles broke America, all revealed in a new documentary with never-seen-before footage.
And after a cold and frosty few days, will the weekend be any warmer? I'll give you all the details and the full weekend forecast a little later in the programme.
But first, ITV News has learned of the alarming number of school teachers who've been physically abused by pupils. An exclusive survey of almost 8,000 teachers by Teacher Tap found that a third of teachers have been either hit or pushed by a student in the last year. And shockingly, the majority of that physical abuse takes place in primary school. It comes as schools face a teacher retention crisis, with the numbers quitting the profession at a record high. One leading teaching union told us that behaviour had worsened since the pandemic and that children aren't getting the mental health support they need. Our social affairs correspondent Sarah Corker has our special report.
Shocking testimony from teachers reveals the level of abuse they face from pupils. Knives brought into school, threats and intimidation, physical attacks that have left teachers unconscious. All of this destroying careers.
I got quite a few black eyes. I was headbutted, kicked, bitten, scratched, headbutted in the stomach.
A primary school teacher in Devon for 22 years, Bethan had faced physical attacks on an almost daily basis.
I was writing on our little whiteboard and a child had become extremely dysregulated and kicked me in the side, and I ended up with damage to my kidney, which resulted in lots of infections.
Cutbacks have left teachers overwhelmed and children not getting the help they desperately need.
When you don't have enough staff and you don't have enough TAs to support children who have needs, or where there isn't the money for the specialist provision, and a lot of it is because of funding.
Not respectful, not safe.
Since COVID, behaviour in the classroom has deteriorated. There have been a wave of strikes, with staff fearing for their safety.
Abuse and violence in the classroom are driving teachers out of the profession in increasing numbers. An exclusive survey by TeacherTap for ITV News of almost 8,000 teachers found that a third of them in England had been physically abused. That's either being hit or pushed by a pupil in the last year. Now, the majority of physical abuse takes place in primary school, with 44% of respondents saying they'd experienced some level of violence, while a huge 2/3 of teachers said they'd been verbally abused by their students. And this abuse isn't limited to the classroom or from pupils. 40% of teachers said they'd also experienced verbal abuse from parents. And this is just one of the factors impacting teacher retention. Look at what's happened over the last decade. You can see there was a dip during COVID, but then the number of teachers quitting the profession is rising, currently at a record high. In fact, in the last school year alone, you can see 40,000 teachers left. And then if we look at teacher vacancies, they've more than doubled since 2020, with nearly 3,000 posts currently available.
We're post-COVID, getting into the second, third and fourth year that we come out of COVID. And these are situations that have been getting worse and worse day in, day out for teachers. And we're hearing complaints about this regularly. And we need to act purposefully and make sure that we can intervene to support young people, but also, more importantly, be able to support teachers so that they can feel that their voices are being heard.
Some staff have told us they fear for their personal safety. We've protected this teacher's identity.
The child took a knife out of the staff room and chased another adult saying, "I'm going to stab you." And the child was 7.
A primary teacher in the southeast, she is also the SENCO at her school, managing how they support children with special educational needs.
You feel as though everybody agrees this is a problem, but there is no answer. I'm also concerned about the future generation. They're going to be vulnerable adults because they haven't had the teaching that they need in order to survive.
And there are serious shortages of educational psychologists like Hannah and other specialist support staff in the classroom.
The system is totally overwhelmed. So I will often speak to parents who will say to me that they've had their child referred to CAMS, which is Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services, and they might be on a wait list for longer than 18 months, 2 years. And when you're thinking about that child's needs not being met, that's also the family's needs not being met.
For children, the consequences of not getting the right help can be devastating.
Excluding him was definitely just an easy option.
In July, we brought you Lucas's story. He was waiting for an ADHD and autism assessment. And aged just 5 years old, he was excluded permanently after kicking a teacher.
The head teacher said that the teachers are too scared to return to work while Lucas is there. I thought it was ridiculous. He's a 5-year-old. He's kicked a teacher to get out of his way because he's sat in front of the door, and he's literally just kicked him in the shin because he's been a scared, trapped child.
After months in a pupil referral unit with teenagers, he is now getting the right support and is back in school. Back in Devon, it all got too much for Bethan, and last year she quit the job she loved.
I don't think many people choose to go into a job where every day they know that they might be hurt, and it was just really sad, and I do feel sad that I left, but I think in the end you have to look after your health.
The government told us it's investing £1 billion in special education and providing mental health professionals in every school, reforms that are urgently needed to help both teachers and students. Sarah Corker, ITV News.
Well, if you want to know more about this story, you can read Sarah's piece on our website. That's itv.com/news. Let's get an update on what's making the news tonight. Well, there have been tears of happiness and disappointment by campaigners from both sides tonight as MPs voted in favour of assisted dying. The historic vote was won by 330 in favour to 275 against. There'll now be months of scrutiny and approval before the bill becomes law. Dame Esther Anson, who is terminally ill, is one of the high-profile campaigners for the bill. Speaking to ITV News on a phone call, she told us she's very happy and determined to stay alive to see the law come into place. Officials in India say they've had no contact from British authorities over the search for the man suspected of murdering Harshita Brella. Police believe she was killed by her husband, Pankaj Lamba, who ITV News understands fled to India the next day. Tonight, a walking vigil is being held in Harshita's memory in Corby, where she last lived. Our Midlands correspondent, Ben Chapman, is there. And Ben, thoughts, of course, tonight with Harshita and her family.
That's right, very much so. This weekend marks 3 weeks since police believe Harshita Brella was murdered, and this evening around 100 people came together here for a torchlit walk and vigil to remember her. Most of them had never met Harshita, but they wanted to express sympathy and solidarity with her family over in India, who've told us tonight that they are very touched by the gesture. But they also tell us they are confused and frustrated by what they see as a lack of progress in tracking down her husband, the prime suspect in Harshita's murder. Her body was driven from here in Corby to East London in the boot of a car, and ITV News understands the same day her husband Pankaj Lamba boarded a flight from Heathrow first to Mumbai and then on to Delhi. But today at a briefing in India, a journalist working for ITV News asked the official spokesman for the Ministry of External Affairs if the Indian government had received any request to pursue an investigation in this case, or had received a so-called red notice, a request to track down and arrest a suspect. His answer: "We have not received any request on this account, not yet." Now, we asked the UK Home Office for a response to his comments. We're told it is long-standing normal practice for the government here not to comment on whether any extradition request has been made until an arrest takes place. Northamptonshire Police, for their part, say they will continue to investigate Harshita's murder here and that they are committed to getting justice for her.
OK, thanks very much, Ben. Fresh allegations of inappropriate comments have been levelled at MasterChef presenter Greg Wallace. He stepped away from his role on the BBC show over historical misconduct complaints, which are now being reviewed externally. Today, the presenter took to social media to thank his fans for their support. Here's Geraint Vincent.
You are cooking for a place in the semi-finals.
MasterChef is recorded months in advance, so Greg Wallace was still very much one of the faces of the programme when it went out last night. But while he has stepped down from the show, while the production company which makes it investigates historical complaints about his behaviour, a previous contestant on Celebrity MasterChef has been telling us about her memories of working with him.
It was as if, he didn't know how to sort of be.
and how to make a conversation, how to connect with other people on an adult level. So it was as if he reverted to this sort of schoolboy mode, and that was how he kind of filled the space. Yeah, kind of sad, actually.
I find it quite pleasant. Left to my own devices, I'd probably munch the living daylights out of your little tart. Very, very nice.
Excuse me?
Since he stepped down, BBC News has reported new allegations of inappropriate behaviour from 13 different individuals on 5 different shows over a period of 17 years, and that Wallace was warned by the BBC about his unprofessional behaviour in 2018. Tonight, the presenter was dropped as an ambassador for an autism charity. His last public statement was a message on his social media.
I would like to thank all the people.
Lawyers for Greg Wallace say it is entirely false that he engages in behaviour of a sexually harassing nature. Geraint Vincent, ITV News.
A woman who was killed after the e-bike she was riding was rammed in a hit-and-run crash has been named by police. 25-year-old Alana Armstrong was a passenger on the back of an e-bike that was pursued by a 4x4 in Derbyshire on Tuesday evening. The rider in front, a man in his 20s, was taken to hospital where one of his legs was amputated. Police have since launched a murder inquiry. And police are urging a TikTok influencer to hand himself in after he failed to show up at court, with recent videos appearing to show him in Qatar. Harrison Sullivan, who has over 30,000 followers on TikTok, missed his court date after allegedly crashing a McLaren supercar in Surrey in March. Harry Potter star Rupert Grint has been ordered to pay a further £1.8 million in tax. The actor who played Ron Weasley in the movie franchise lost a legal battle with HM Revenue and Customs after they launched an investigation into his tax return from the 2011 to 2012 tax year. Next tonight, the dramatic moment a gang were caught red-handed as they tried to collect £90 million worth of cocaine smuggled into Britain. They were trapped by a National Crime Agency sting operation at Sheerness Docks in Kent. The drugs were hidden in a shipment of bananas from Costa Rica. Today, the gang were jailed for a total of 72 years. Louisa Britton has the story.
A convoy of 2 vans passes through a security checkpoint at Sheerness Port. Instead of stopping them, the guard waves the drivers through, on their way to collect more than a tonne's worth of cocaine. So far, all's going to plan. But unbeknownst to them, they're being watched. The National Crime Agency has had the gang under surveillance for 2 months, waiting for the opportune moment to catch them red-handed.
In this case, we captured evidence of the group practicing using a forklift, practicing with crates to move in, so they were prepared. They are a well-organised, sophisticated group. This is an enormous seizure for the UK.
More than 100 officers descended on the port on the night of the 20th of December 2021. Inside a container, they find drugs with an estimated street value of £90 million, hidden amongst a shipment of bananas. A month earlier, one of the gang leaders, Joel McCoffey, had flown out to Costa Rica to oversee the shipment. And text messages on his phone showed he stood to make £400,000. Instead, he'll now spend the next 13 years in prison. He's one of 6 men to plead guilty to conspiring to import the Class A drugs, this afternoon sentenced to a combined 72 years behind bars. The security guard, Sam Elphick, who helped the group, jailed for 2 years.
He was used to open up the barriers, to let the crew in, to alter the CCTV, to manipulate his colleagues. He was a crucial key to this entire operation.
An operation that wasn't the last carried out at Sheerness Port, with several others in recent years, as authorities continue to try to stem the flow of drugs onto the UK streets. Louisa Britton, ITV News.
Wales is to become the first part of the UK to introduce stricter rules on tattoo artists in a bid to protect the public. All practitioners of tattoos, body piercings, acupuncture and electrolysis will have to pass a course on infection prevention, but the licences will cost more than £200, and that's led to concerns that customers will fit the bill, as Rob Murphy reports.
1 in 4 of us have tattoos, and in Wales from today, artists will need a new licence. So getting inked may come at an extra cost. At the Garrison studio in Neath in South Wales, they supported the plans.
It's raising the standards, that's what it's doing. Out of the wood, you know, off the bat, like it's getting rid of a lot of people who are going from the house, and it's regulating it, which is a good thing.
Under today's new rules, more than 4,000 practitioners must pay £203 for a licence. On top of that, around 2,000 premises will need certification, costing £385. The licences need to be renewed every 3 years. Increased regulations, increased cost, but customers said this will lead to increased standards.
If you haven't got a certification, you've got to ask the question why, haven't you? Yeah. And that's why finding a good tattooist who's clean, professional, is really important.
Yeah, I'm not bothered the pricing or anything like that, as long as the tattoo is good.
Not all tattoos are performed under these high standards. The Welsh Government introduced the new scheme after some customers went to low-end artists for tattoos and came out with awful health conditions.
We've put the regulations in place to provide protection against serious skin infections, which can be disfiguring, or bloodborne infections such as hepatitis A and B and HIV, which clearly can have a lifelong and life-altering impact.
Tattoo artists have known for years that today was coming, but it's still an unwelcome burden to some.
It kind of has come in at the worst time possible. This year in the industry has been the hardest year, I think, for anybody. I've seen multiple studios that have been struggling.
The new rules apply to more than tattoo parlours. Acupuncture, piercings and some semi-permanent makeup procedures are also included. And the rest of the UK will be watching closely to see what happens here in Wales. Robert Murphy, ITV News, Neath.
A cryptocurrency entrepreneur has followed through on his promise to eat a banana, which he bought for £4.9 million. Justin's son bought the viral art piece consisting of a single banana duct taped to a white wall at an auction in New York last week. The Chinese-born businessman ate the fruit during a news conference in Hong Kong, but said he'd been taught how to replace the banana when he bought it. Just couldn't really make that up, could you? Right, coming up before Ramadan. A new documentary reveals how the Beatles won the heart of Americans.
And it's certainly been a stormy week. Will the weekend bring any calmer conditions? I'll give you all the details just after the break.
Yeah, so do join me and Becky for that after the break. Okay, it's time for the weather here. Weather now. Becky's here, as you can see. And despite the cold snap that loads of us have been experiencing, it's technically not winter yet, is it?
Technically, no. I mean, the way that we do it is that our first meteorological winter month starts on the 1st of December. So we say it's winter from December, although, of course, I know that there's solstice and stuff to deal with. But from a weather point of view, we are definitely moving into winter on Sunday. Having said that, having had a cold few days, which definitely did feel wintry, it's actually getting an awful lot milder over the next couple of days. If we run the sequence over the next few days, you can see that we've got these much milder tones across us at the moment. The wind is coming in from a much milder south to southwesterly direction. And this takes us over the weekend, but then fairly quickly, we've got high pressure establishing itself once more to the north of us. And that, of course, generates this much colder Arctic plunge once again. So that's really what we've got over the next couple of days, something much, much milder and then colder again, just in time for the start of winter. But if we have a look at how those temperatures look, you can see that we really are going to be having quite an effect from that real blast from the south. Temperatures rising up around sort of 15 degrees. This is sort of 8 to 10 degrees milder than many parts have seen over the last few days. So we're not going to be having the cold and frosty nights over the weekend, but certainly by the time we get into next week, it starts tailing off again. But even so, 11 degrees is still really quite a long way above the seasonal average of just 8. And then it does get colder Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday, and then briefly a little bit milder again. So it's a little bit topsy-turvy at the moment, but definitely something milder on the cards for the next 48 hours. Let's have a look at the detail.
Visibility may be low this evening as the cold weather hits. Heinz Soups sponsors ITV National Weather.
So let's get all the gory detail for the weekend then. I'm afraid we are going to be exchanging the cold, but for most of us, sunny conditions that we've had over the last couple of days for something an awful lot more unsettled. And as we look ahead to this evening and overnight, you can see we've got a weather front that moves eastwards across the UK, and that is going to be bringing us more in the way of cloud and some milder conditions as well. Just look at that contrast in temperatures, 5 across the east and more like 11 to 12 towards the far west. And temperatures actually rising across the UK as we end the night, but it's quite a gloomy sort of picture, I think, and quite a slow start to tomorrow with bits and bobs of rain in places. So as we start the day tomorrow, we do so with a fair amount of kind of grey sky, gloomy sort of stuff. There will be some brightness in between, but if you see any, rush out and enjoy it quickly because that cloud is never too far away. And it's a sort of drizzly day, really, with most of the substantial rain just away to the far northern parts of Scotland. But just look at those temperatures. It's a mild wind as well, coming from that warm southerly direction. So temperatures really boosting up to around 12, 13, 14, even 15 degrees at best. Bearing in mind we're moving into December, that's very mild indeed for the time of year and will certainly feel more so compared to what we've had recently. So that system continues its journey eastwards as we look ahead to the second half of the weekend. Something a little bit brighter tucking in behind, so sunny spells and showers, but certainly for the east, a pretty grotty day, I think, on Sunday. And as I say, as we move into the next week, those temperatures dip away once again.
Heinz Soups sponsors ITV National Weather.
I think we might get some snow next week.
Oh, really?
Across the higher ground. But any sign of anything snowy in winter gets me going.
Pleased to hear it. Thanks very much. And finally tonight, the Beatles as you've never seen them before. A new documentary features previously unseen footage of the Fab Four on their monumentous first visit to the United States back in 1964. They were mobbed by thousands of fans as soon as they arrived, and their famous appearance on the Ed Sullivan Show helped launch them to global success. Here's our entertainment reporter, Rishi Davda.
The screams that greeted the Fab Four as they took their stardom stateside confirmed the spread of Beatlemania. On a trip of just 14 days, John, Paul, George and Ringo chaotically crafted a musical legacy that would last a lifetime.
We were just like, we're in America. America. It's great being here in New York. Okay. Washington. Oh, is that the place? I don't know. Washington.
A new documentary is showing rare behind-the-scenes footage of the tour back in 1964.
We're doing it. Oh, for the film. Oh, go on then. What should we do?
It's an intimate look at a musical movement which the band believed the US was crying out for.
America had been in mourning. It was quite shortly after Kennedy had been assassinated. Maybe America needed something like the Beatles to lift it out of mourning and just sort of say life goes on.
A record-breaking 73 million people watched the Liverpudlian Quartet perform on the Ed Sullivan Show.
Hello. How you doing, Ringo? I'm all right.
Now fans will get to see what happened in the moments away from public view.
The Beatles, I think, were always quite authentic. And that's what you see, their friendship, their surprise, their happiness. I mean, this was a dream of a lifetime. All their musical heroes were American.
The Beatles crossed not only a geographical divide, but a cultural one too, their visit helping the fall of musical borders.
They were the first white group that I had ever heard in my life. The first white artist ever of their magnitude that I had ever heard in my life. Say, yeah. We grew up listening to black music. We love Motown.
Brits had fallen in love with the Beatles, and by 1964, so too had the Americans.
We think they're just great, especially their hair too.
A group that, to this day, many would still consider our greatest export. Rishi Davda, ITV News.
And it's hello, goodbye from us for now. See what we did there? Well, Julie's here with the latest after I'm a Celeb. But from me and the rest of the Evening News team, you enjoy your weekend. Bye-bye.